What happens when an act of pure kindness puts you in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous syndicate? A struggling waitress shared her meager lunch with a battered, silent child for 3 weeks. She didn't know his silence hid a multi-million-dollar ransom or that his father was coming. Cold wind whipped off Boston Harbor, carrying the bitter scent of salt and impending winter through the cracked back door of O'Malley's diner. Callista Jenkins shivered, pulling her frayed wool cardigan tighter over her stained uniform. At 23, Callista carried the weight of a life lived entirely on the defensive. Her mother was currently lying in a sterile room at Massachusetts General Hospital, tethered to dialysis machines that racked up bills faster than Callista could pour coffee. Every shift, every tip, every grueling double-header on her feet was a desperate attempt to keep the collection agencies at bay. Tuesday night was garbage night on Dorchester Avenue. Callista hoisted the heavy, dripping black trash bag, kicking the metal back door open with her worn-out Converse sneaker. She tossed the bag into the rusted green dumpster, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. As she turned to head back into the suffocating warmth of the kitchen, a sharp rustle from behind a stack of broken wooden pallets made her freeze. Rats were common in Southie, but rats didn't gasp. Callista slowly reached for the heavy iron crowbar the cooks kept propped against the brick wall for breaking up ice. Gripping it tightly, she took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trying for authoritative but landing somewhere near terrified. "I'm calling the cops. O'Malley already paid the precinct this month, so they'll actually show up." No answer. Only the shallow, frantic sound of breathing. Callista stepped around the pallets, raising the iron bar. Her breath hitched in her throat, and the makeshift weapon dropped to her side. Huddled in the narrow gap between the brick wall and the dumpster was a child. He couldn't have been older than 8. His knees were pulled tightly to his chest, his thin arms wrapped around his shins. But it was his clothes that made Callista pause. Despite being covered in grime, soot, and what looked terrifyingly like dried dark stains, he was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Callista's monthly rent. On his feet were small, scuffed leather loafers that bore the faint, unmistakable metal logo of Gucci. "Hey," Callista whispered, her defensive posture melting instantly. She crouched down, keeping her distance so as not to spook him. "Hey there, buddy. Are you okay?" The boy didn't move. He stared at her with wide, terrified hazel eyes. His left cheek was severely bruised, a blooming purple contusion that made Callista's stomach twist with maternal rage. His dark hair was matted with dirt and leaves. "Where are your parents?" Callista asked softly. Silence. The boy just blinked, pulling his knees closer, trying to make himself as small as possible. Callista looked up and down the dark, deserted alleyway. The distant wail of a siren cut through the city noise, but nothing else stirred. She looked back at the boy. If she called the police, he would be thrown into the chaotic meat grinder of the foster system, a system Callista herself had barely survived during her teenage years when her mother first got sick. She knew what happened to silent, traumatized kids in holding facilities. "I'm Callista," she said, keeping her voice low and steady, the same tone she used to calm her mother during bad pain flares. "I work inside. It's warm. And we have about 10 gallons of leftover clam chowder that O'Malley is going to make me throw out. Are you hungry?" The boy didn't nod, didn't speak, but his eyes flicked toward the open kitchen door, where the golden light and the smell of fried butter and potatoes spilled into the alley. "I'm going to leave the door cracked," Callista said, slowly standing up and backing away. "I'll put a bowl right inside. You can come get it, or you can stay here. I won't grab you. I promise." Callista retreated into the kitchen. She grabbed a thick ceramic bowl, filled it to the brim with steaming chowder, and buttered 2 thick slices of sourdough bread. She placed it on a milk crate just inside the door, walked to the far side of the kitchen, and pretended to scrub down the stainless steel prep tables. 10 minutes passed. Just as Callista thought he had run away, a small, trembling shadow crept into the doorway. The boy snatched the bread, dipped it into the soup, and shoved it into his mouth with the desperate, feral speed of a starving animal. He ate the entire bowl, standing half in, half out of the cold night air, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. When he finished, he set the bowl down gently on the crate. He looked at Callista across the room, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and vanished back into the dark alley. Callista let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She didn't know who this kid was, or what nightmare he was running from, but as she picked up the empty bowl, she made a quiet vow. As long as he kept showing up, she would keep feeding him. 3 weeks passed. November dug its icy claws into Boston, turning the rain into sleet and the wind into a physical assault. True to her silent promise, Callista became the boy's lifeline. Every night at 9 p.m., she would slip out the back door of the diner. He never came inside again. The kitchen was too bright, too exposed. Instead, he made a permanent camp inside the hollowed-out shell of an abandoned delivery van, parked 3 alleys over, near an old textile warehouse. Callista had followed him at a distance one night to make sure he had shelter. The next day, she brought a thick, fleece-lined Carhartt jacket she had found at a Goodwill in Cambridge, along with a heavy woolen blanket. They developed a routine. Callista would bring food, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, chicken soup, whatever wasn't spoiled. She would sit on a turned-over bucket outside the van while he ate inside the rusted chassis. "You know, my mom makes the best lasagna," Callista told him one evening, watching his small hands clutch a styrofoam cup of hot chocolate. "She uses a secret ingredient, nutmeg. Sounds crazy, right? But it works." The boy paused his drinking and looked at her. He still hadn't spoken a single word. Callista had tried everything, asking his name, his favorite color, if he knew his address. Nothing. It wasn't just a refusal to speak. Callista recognized the profound, locked-in silence of deep, psychological trauma. To bridge the gap, Callista had started bringing a notebook and a pack of Crayola crayons. "If you don't want to talk, that's okay," she had said, sliding the notebook toward him. "You can draw." Tonight, as Callista talked about her mother, the boy picked up a black crayon. He didn't draw a house, or a family, or a dog. With surprisingly steady, deliberate strokes, he began sketching a crest. 2 wolves facing each other, a crown hovering above them, and a sword piercing down through the center. It was incredibly detailed for a child's drawing. Callista frowned, leaning closer. "That's a very specific picture, buddy. Is that a logo from a video game?" The boy shook his head once. He pointed to the drawing, then pointed to his chest. "It's yours?" Callista asked. He nodded, a profound sadness swimming in his hazel eyes. He then pointed to his chest again, and then pointed far away, out toward the wealthy skyline of downtown Boston, shimmering across the water. Before Callista could press further, the sharp crunch of gravel echoed from the top of the alley. The boy froze. His face went entirely pale, and he scrambled backward into the deepest, darkest corner of the van, throwing the blanket over his head. Callista's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood up, kicking the bucket aside, and smoothed down her apron to look as casual as possible. 2 men emerged from the shadows. They didn't look like local Dorchester thugs. They were wearing dark, expensive trench coats over tailored suits. The taller one had a broken nose that hadn't healed right, and a thick, jagged scar running down his neck, disappearing under a crisp white collar. "Evening, sweetheart," the scarred man said, his voice a low, raspy gravel. His eyes swept over the alley, lingering on the abandoned van. "Awfully cold night for a waitress to be taking a stroll in the dark." "I'm taking my smoke break," Callista lied smoothly, pulling a crushed pack of Marlboros from her apron pocket, a prop she kept exactly for dealing with creeps. She placed an unlit cigarette between her lips. "Unless there's a law against that now." The second man, shorter but built like a fire hydrant, stepped forward. "We're looking for someone, a kid, about 8 years old, dark hair. Went missing from the Beacon Hill area a few weeks back. Boss is offering a very generous reward for any information." The short man pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills, casually flipping through them. It was more money than Callista made in 6 months. It was enough to pay off her mother's immediate hospital debt. Callista felt the magnetic pull of the cash, but then she remembered the bruises on the boy's face, the sheer terror in his eyes. These men weren't worried relatives. They moved like predators. "Beacon Hill?" Callista let out a harsh, convincing laugh. "Do I look like I hang out with kids from Beacon Hill? The only kids around here are stealing hubcaps. I haven't seen any rich boys." The scarred man stared at her, his dark eyes boring into hers. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. Callista forced herself not to flinch. "You sure about that, Callista?" he asked softly, reading her name tag. "Because the cooks inside said you've been taking extra food out back every night. Panic flared in her chest, but Callista channeled years of working-class survival into a sneer. Yeah, I feed the strays. There's a pack of feral cats that live behind the dumpsters. You want to go check? Be my guest, but they bite. The scarred man stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, he smirked. Keep your eyes open, waitress. If you see him, call this number. Don't try to be a hero. Heroes end up in the harbor. He dropped a sleek black business card onto the wet pavement. The two men turned and walked away, their heavy footsteps fading into the city noise. Callista waited until she was absolutely sure they were gone before she slumped against the side of the rusted van, her knees trembling. She picked up the card. It was matte black with silver embossed lettering. No name, just a phone number and a tiny logo in the corner. Two wolves facing each other, a crown and a sword. Callista dropped the card as if it had burned her fingers. She turned to the dark interior of the van. The boy had pushed the blanket down and was staring at her, tears finally spilling over his bruised cheeks. Okay, Callista breathed, her mind racing. Okay, you're not just a runaway, are you? She reached in and grabbed his small hand. It was ice cold. We can't stay here, she said firmly. They're circling. You're coming home with me tonight. For 4 days, Callista hid the boy whose name she still didn't know in her cramped one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. She called out sick from her day shifts, only working the late-night diner hours when she could lock him safely inside with the television on and strict instructions not to make a sound. The atmosphere in the city had shifted. It was palpable. The regular police presence in South Boston had mysteriously vanished, replaced by an unsettling quiet tension. Black SUVs with tinted windows cruised the streets slowly. The local drug dealers and petty thieves had completely cleared out, sensing a massive apex predator in their waters. Callista spent hours researching the symbol on the business card, using her cracked smartphone. It took diving into deep, encrypted local forums to finally find an answer, and when she did, the blood drained from her face. The Costello Syndicate, the reigning crime family of New England, controlled shipping, construction, and underground casinos from Boston to Providence. Led by Davion Costello, a man known to the FBI as untouchable and known to the streets as a ruthless, calculating king who had violently consolidated power after his wife was assassinated 5 years ago in a car bombing meant for him. Callista stared at the sleeping boy on her worn-out sofa. She was harboring the heir to a Mafia empire. Why is he hiding? She wondered frantically. If he's the boss's son, why is he terrified? Why the bruises? The answer hit her with sickening clarity. An inside job. A coup. The men looking for him weren't trying to rescue him to return him to his father. They were the ones who had taken him in the first place. The boy had escaped his captors, and they were hunting him down before his father could find out they had betrayed him. We have to go to the police, Callista muttered to herself, pacing the small room. But she remembered the scarred man. If the syndicate had cops on the payroll, walking into a precinct with Davion Costello's son would be a death sentence for both of them. Thursday night arrived. Callista had no choice but to go to work. She was out of money, and O'Malley threatened to fire her if she missed another shift. She wrapped the boy in the heavy Carhartt jacket, pulled a beanie down over his ears, and took him with her. She hid him in the diner's dry storage pantry, nestled between 50-pound bags of flour and industrial cans of tomato sauce. Don't move, she whispered, handing him her phone loaded with offline games. I'll be right outside the door. The diner was dead. Rain lashed against the large front windows, distorting the neon glow of the streetlights. O'Malley was in the back office doing payroll. Callista stood behind the counter, wiping down the laminate surface for the 4th time, her nerves wired with too much black coffee and pure adrenaline. At 11:42 p.m., the street outside went completely dark. Callista stopped wiping. She looked up. The streetlights on Dorchester Avenue had simultaneously flickered and died. A moment later, the headlights of 5 massive, black Cadillac Escalades cut through the torrential rain. They moved with military precision, swerving to block the street in both directions. 2 of the vehicles pulled directly up onto the sidewalk, blocking the diner's front doors. "O'Malley!" Callista screamed, her voice cracking. Before the manager could emerge from his office, the diner doors burst open. A dozen men flooded into the small restaurant. They weren't street thugs. They wore bespoke Italian suits beneath dark cashmere overcoats. They moved silently, efficiently, sweeping the perimeter. One man marched straight to the back office, kicked the door open, and dragged a sputtering O'Malley out by his collar, tossing him onto a booth seat. Callista backed up against the swinging doors of the kitchen, her hand blindly reaching behind her until her fingers wrapped around the handle of a heavy Wüsthof chef's knife resting on the cutting board. She pulled it forward, holding it low behind the counter. The armed men formed a path, standing at attention. Through the open doors stepped a man who commanded the room the second his leather shoes touched the linoleum. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his face was carved from granite handsome, but entirely devoid of warmth. His eyes were a pale, striking gray, and they scanned the room with terrifying, predatory intelligence. Davion Costello. He didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like the angel of death. Following closely behind Davion was the scarred man who had confronted Callista in the alley days ago. Arthur Sterling, Davion's underboss. Arthur pointed a leather-gloved finger directly at Callista. "That's her, boss, the waitress. My guys caught her sneaking food to the alleys. We have reason to believe she's working with the rival crew who took Leo. She knows where he is." Callista's mind violently snapped the puzzle pieces together. Arthur was the traitor. He had orchestrated the kidnapping, lost the boy, and was now framing Callista to save his own skin, leading the furious boss right to her to silence them both. Davion Costello walked slowly toward the counter. The sheer physical presence of the man made Callista's knees want to buckle. He stopped 2 feet away from her, his pale eyes locking onto hers. "Where is my son?" Davion asked. His voice was not a shout. It was a terrifyingly calm, deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. Callista tightened her grip on the hidden knife. Her heart was beating so fast it blurred her vision. If she gave Leo to Arthur, the boy was dead. If she lied to Davion Costello, she was dead. "I don't know what you're talking about," Callista said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. Arthur stepped forward, drawing a heavy, suppressed pistol from his coat. "Stop playing games, trash. Tell the boss where the boy is, or I paint this diner with your brains." Davion raised a single finger, and Arthur instantly froze, lowering the weapon slightly, though his eyes burned with malice. "Look at me," Davion commanded Callista softly. "My boy, Leo. He is 8 years old. He does not speak. He was taken from me 22 days ago. This man," he gestured slightly to Arthur, "says you are part of the crew that holds him. If you are, I will dismantle you piece by piece. If you tell me where he is, I will give you anything you desire." Callista stared into Davion's eyes. Beneath the lethal, icy exterior, she saw the microscopic fracture of a father's absolute, soul-crushing despair. "He's not telling you the truth," Callista whispered, glaring at Arthur. "He's the one who was looking for him in the alleys. He offered me money to find him. He lost him." Arthur's face twisted in rage. "She's lying! Boss, she's trying to stall. Let me handle this." He raised the gun, aiming it directly at Callista's chest. Callista didn't think. She acted on pure survival instinct. She whipped the chef's knife from behind the counter, holding it out with both hands, placing her body squarely between the pantry door and the mobsters. "Don't you take another step!" Callista screamed, the knife shaking wildly in her grip. "I won't let you hurt him. I'll kill you first." The bodyguards instantly raised a dozen assault rifles, the sound of safeties clicking off echoing like firecrackers in the diner. Davion didn't blink. He looked from the shaking knife in Callista's hand to the fierce, protective stance of her body. She wasn't standing defensively to protect herself. She was guarding the door behind her. Before anyone could move, a small sound broke the standoff. A tiny, rusted squeak. The pantry door slowly pushed open. Everyone froze. Leo stood in the doorway. He was still wearing the oversized Carhartt beanie and the fleece jacket Callista had given him. He looked at the guns, at the terrifying men, at Arthur's shocked face, and finally, at the tall man in the charcoal suit. Davion Costello, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, dropped to his knees on the greasy linoleum floor. The tailored suit didn't matter. The guns didn't matter. The king fell to the earth, his hands trembling violently as he reached out. "Leo," Davion choked out, the name ripping from his throat in a ragged, breathless sob. For the first time in 22 days, the silent boy moved with explosive speed. Leo ran past Callista, past the counter, and threw himself into his father's arms. Davion buried his face in his son's neck, wrapping his massive arms around the small boy, rocking him back and forth on the floor of the diner as tears streamed down the mob boss's hardened face. Callista slowly lowered the knife, her hands numb. Arthur Sterling, realizing his coup had just spectacularly failed, slowly began to raise his pistol toward Davion's back. But Leo saw it. Still clutching his father, the boy lifted his head. He looked directly at Arthur, then pointed a small, shaking finger right at the underboss. For the first time since Callista had met him, Leo opened his mouth. His voice was hoarse, raspy from disuse, but entirely clear. "Papa," Leo whispered, pointing at Arthur. "He hurt me. He took me." The temperature in the diner seemed to plummet below freezing. Davion Costello stopped rocking. He slowly pulled back from his son, kissing his forehead with profound tenderness. Then Davion stood up. The tears were gone. The grieving father vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless apex predator. Davion didn't even draw a weapon. He simply looked at the bodyguards standing around the room. "Take Arthur to the meatpacking plant," Davion said, his voice a dead, hollow void. "Keep him alive until I get there." Arthur didn't even have time to scream before 4 men tackled him to the ground, disarmed him, and dragged him violently out the front doors into the rain. Davion turned back to Callista. She was still standing behind the counter, the whisked-off knife clattering out of her limp fingers onto the floor. She braced herself, unsure if she was about to be thanked or executed for knowing too much. Davion looked at her cheap, stained uniform. He looked at the dark circles under her eyes. Then he looked at the heavy, warm jacket his son was wearing. A jacket he knew didn't belong to his son's expensive wardrobe. The mob boss walked slowly up to the counter. He reached into his coat pocket. Callista flinched, but he didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a pristine white linen handkerchief and gently reached across the counter, wiping a smudge of dirt from Callista's trembling cheek. "You guarded my blood," Davion said softly, his pale gray eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "When my own men betrayed me, a stranger in a diner protected my soul." I just fed him," Callista stammered. Davion smiled, a faint, dangerous, yet devastatingly genuine expression. "Pack your things, Callista Jenkins. You don't work here anymore." Boston's wealthy elite knew the sprawling gated compound in Weston only by rumors. Tucked away behind wrought iron gates and acres of dense, ancient pines, the Costello estate was a fortress disguised as a breathtaking architectural masterpiece. For Callista Jenkins, transitioning from a damp apartment above a Dorchester laundromat to a mansion with a small army of security personnel was a jarring, terrifying leap into an alternate reality. Within 24 hours of the incident at the diner, Callista's life had been surgically dismantled and rebuilt by Davion's invisible hand. Her mother, Margaret, was seamlessly transferred via private ambulance from the overcrowded public wards of Massachusetts General Hospital to a VIP suite at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Davion had personally retained Dr. Jonathan Aris, one of the top transplant nephrologists on the East Coast, to manage Margaret's care. Margaret was bumped to the top of the private donor registry, her staggering medical debts quietly erased by a single wire transfer from a Cayman shell corporation. Callista's new reality involved waking up in a massive guest suite overlooking a private lake. Her official title was Leo's private companion, a role that required no uniform and carried a salary that made Callista dizzy. Yet, the gilded cage still felt dangerous. Weeks bled into December. Leo began to thrive in the safety of his home. The bruised, terrified child from the alley faded, replaced by a quiet but fiercely intelligent boy. He clung to Callista with an unshakable devotion, refusing to eat dinner unless she was seated next to him at the massive mahogany dining table. His voice returned in soft, hesitant fragments, mostly reserved for Callista and his father. Davion Costello was a phantom in his own home during the daylight hours, orchestrating the violent, methodical dismantling of the traitorous factions within his empire. The Boston underworld was bleeding out, paying the price for Arthur Sterling's failed coup. But when the sun set, Davion returned to the estate, and the ruthless king shed his armor. One evening, Callista found herself in the massive 2-story library of the estate. A fire roared in the marble hearth, casting dancing shadows over walls lined with rare first editions. She was curled in a leather armchair, nursing a glass of expensive Bordeaux, reading a worn paperback she had brought from her old life. Footsteps echoed softly on the Persian rug. Davion entered, loosening the silk tie at his throat. He looked exhausted, the silver at his temples catching the firelight. He walked to a crystal decanter on a side table, poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid, and sat in the armchair opposite Callista. "Dr. Eris called my office this afternoon," Davion murmured, his deep voice carrying easily across the space between them. "They located a viable kidney for your mother. Surgery is scheduled for Tuesday morning." Callista dropped her book, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears instantly pricked her eyes. "Davion, I don't know how I will ever repay you for this. I can work for you for the rest of my life, but it won't be enough." Davion's pale gray eyes locked onto hers, the intensity in his gaze pinning her to the chair. "There is no debt, Callista. You gave me back my life when you kept my son breathing. The hospital bills are pocket change. What you did required a currency of courage that cannot be bought." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the crystal glass dangling from his large fingers. "But we need to discuss your future." Arthur Sterling wasn't acting entirely alone. He had financial backing from the Rossi syndicate down in Providence. Lorenzo Rossi smells blood in the water. Things are going to become increasingly volatile over the next few weeks. Callista swallowed hard. "Are you sending me away?" Davion's jaw tightened. "My instincts scream at me to put you on a private jet to Switzerland, to hide you where the darkness of my world cannot touch you." He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back up to her eyes, but Leo would be devastated. "And I find myself violently opposed to the idea of an empty house." The air in the library grew thick, heavy, with unspoken tension. Callista had spent weeks watching this man, a criminal, a killer, a king, show profound tenderness to his son. She had caught him watching her, too. Lingering glances when she laughed with Leo, a protective hand resting lightly on the small of her back when they walked the estate grounds. She knew she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a beautiful, terrifying abyss. "I'm not leaving," Callista said firmly, lifting her chin. "I'm not afraid of Providence, and I'm not afraid of you." A slow, devastating smirk curved Davion's lips. He set his glass down, standing up and closing the distance between them. He stopped right in front of her chair, reaching down to gently brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm, rough with calluses, sending a shockwave of electricity down her spine. "You should be afraid, little bird," Davion whispered, his voice dark with promise. "Because if you stay, I will never let you go." Winter storms battered the Massachusetts coastline 3 days before Christmas, coating the Weston estate in a thick, treacherous layer of ice. The heavily guarded perimeter was supposed to be impenetrable. Dinner was quiet that night. Leo was upstairs in his playroom, building an intricate Lego fortress, while Callista and Davion lingered over coffee in the formal dining room. The simmering tension between them had grown to a boiling point, manifesting in brushed hands and heated, lingering stares that left Callista breathless. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the dining room burst open. Giovanni, Davion's massive head of security, stepped through, his face entirely drained of color. He carried a suppressed submachine gun strapped to his chest. "Boss, perimeter breach. Multiple hostiles. They used a snowplow to ram the eastern gates. It's Rossi's men." Davion didn't panic. The transformation was instantaneous. The soft, brooding man vanished, replaced by the apex predator. He stood up, sweeping his suit jacket back to reveal the heavy custom pistol holstered at his hip. "Lock down the main house. Get Callista and Leo to the basement vault," Davion ordered coldly. "Davion!" Callista gasped, stumbling out of her chair. "Go with Giovanni," Davion commanded, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was bruising, desperate. "Do not come out until I open that door." He kissed her forehead, a hard, branding kiss. "I will handle Lorenzo Rossi." Callista didn't argue. She turned and sprinted toward the main staircase. She found Leo in his playroom, his eyes wide with returning terror. "Come here, buddy," Callista said, scooping the boy up despite his weight. "We're playing hide and seek. We have to go to the safe room." Before she could reach the hallway, the sickening sound of shattered glass echoed from the ground floor. Gunfire erupted loud, chaotic, and utterly terrifying. The war had entered the house. Callista bolted down the back servant's staircase, clutching Leo tightly to her chest. Giovanni was waiting at the bottom, directing them toward the heavy steel door of the panic room hidden behind a wine rack in the cellar. Just as they reached the cellar landing, two men in tactical gear rounded the corner from the kitchen corridor. Giovanni raised his weapon, taking down the first man in a burst of suppressed fire, but the second man returned fire. Giovanni grunted, stumbling backward as a bullet caught him in the shoulder. "Get in the room!" Giovanni roared, sliding to the floor to provide cover fire. Callista pushed Leo into the small, heavily reinforced concrete room. She turned back to pull the heavy steel door shut, but a third attacker burst into the cellar, kicking Giovanni's weapon away and raising a shotgun toward the safe room. Time slowed. Callista's eyes locked onto the dark barrel of the shotgun. She threw herself backward, placing her body squarely over Leo, bracing for the inevitable, deafening end. A single gunshot cracked through the cellar. The attacker froze, his eyes rolling back in his head as he collapsed forward onto the stone floor. Standing at the top of the cellar stairs was Davion. His dress shirt was stained with soot and torn at the shoulder, but his aim was perfectly steady. He stepped over the bodies, his eyes burning with a murderous rage as he walked down the stairs, sweeping the room to ensure the threat was neutralized. Callista scrambled up, her hands shaking violently. Leo remained huddled in the corner. Davion holstered his weapon and crossed the room in two massive strides. He didn't check the perimeter again. He pulled Callista flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair. His heart hammered against hers, a frantic, desperate rhythm that betrayed his icy exterior. "Are you hurt?" Davion demanded, his hands roughly checking her arms, her shoulders, tilting her face up to meet his wild gaze. "I'm okay," Callista choked out, tears finally spilling over. "Leo is safe." Davion looked over her shoulder at his son, nodding briefly to the boy, a silent communication of survival. Then he looked back at Callista. The mask was completely gone. In the dim, flickering light of the cellar, surrounded by the violent reality of his world, he stripped away all his defenses. "I realized something upstairs," Davion said, his voice ragged. "When they breached the house, I didn't care about my territory. I didn't care about the syndicate or Lorenzo Rossi. The only thing in my mind was getting back to you." He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "This is my world, Callista. It is violent and it is dark, but you are the only light in it. I am asking you to step into the dark with me." Callista looked at the terrifying, beautiful man holding her. She looked back at Leo, who had survived the worst of humanity, and still found a way to smile because she had chosen to stop in an alleyway. She knew she could never go back to pouring coffee. She belonged to the king now, and by his side she would rule. "I'm not stepping into the dark," Callista whispered, reaching up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. "I'm bringing the light with me." Davion's eyes flared, and he brought his mouth crashing down onto hers. It was a kiss forged in adrenaline and gunpowder, a sealing of a vow that no rival syndicate or twisted fate could ever break. The underworld of New England had a king, but as Callista kissed him back, she knew they had just crowned their queen. If this thrilling journey of loyalty, survival, and unexpected love kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this video with fellow romance fans, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired tales. Drop a comment below, would you have protected Leo? Turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter of our daily storytelling.